Who had the biggest fall from grace in history? Philippe Pétain was a national hero of France after World War I. He won the 9-month Battle of Verdun as a general and inspired hope and optimism at a time when it seemed like the war would never end. Fast forward to World War II and he became the head of the state of Vichy France and was a puppet for the Nazis. He ran Vichy state in a semi-fascist manner and constantly sought to appease the Nazis to preserve Vichy's limited freedoms, including signing anti-Semitic ordinances and allowing deportation to concentration camps. At the end of the war, he was convicted of treason on all counts and originally sentenced to death before being reduced to life imprisonment by Charles de Gaulle on account of Pétain's advanced age and service during World War I. De Gaulle would later summarize Pétain's life as successfully banal, then glorious, then deplorable, but never mediocre. And also, the Marshal is a great man who died in 1925. The trouble is, he didn't know it. China had a similar person. Wang Jingwei was beloved for his role in the 1911 revolution, but is now viewed terribly for siding with the Japanese in World War II. His fate was different though. He died in 1944 from a wound he got from an assassination attempt in 1939. The ROC army destroyed his tomb and his burial place now has a note that calls him a traitor. Icarus. Well, if we're going there, I would argue Lucifer Morningstar, winner. Pretty sure it's the origin of the phrase fall from grace. Benedict Arnold, hero general of the American Revolution, one of George Washington's best assets, felt slighted and overlooked by his contemporaries. Switched sides to the British made no difference to the war effort, died in disgrace in England. His name is now a synonym for traitor. Since this is getting some attention, for anyone interested in learning about the man, I highly recommend watching Benedict Arnold: A Question of Honor, a TV movie from 2003 starring Alden Quinn as Arnold and Kelsey Grammer as Washington. If Ethan Allen didn't screw him over after Saratoga, he would have risen much higher. I'm sure it didn't help that his wife favored the British. I still believe if he was patient just a little while longer, he would have gotten recognized and became a potentially positive player in early American history. Harvey Weinstein. He was Hollywood when he got outed for the POS he is, but this guy produced the Lord of the Rings trilogy, every Tarantino movie except Hollywood, and Good Will Hunting, and subsequently, about every Damon or Affleck project from that time to his downfall. He's won more Oscars than any person could ever dream of and has made more money off films than maybe anyone ever. That guy, oh man, I think he fell the furthest, the hardest, and the fastest. Well deserved though. Well freaking deserved. Roses are red, violets are glorious. Don't try to surprise Oscar Pistorius. My son's high school played rugby against Oscar's old high school. Whenever anyone went into the team toilets, they'd call out, "I'm on the loo, don't shoot me." Small interesting aside, Elon Musk also attended Oscar's high school years before. Fritz Haber. A German chemist and Nobel Prize winner, he helped pioneer the Haber process for synthesizing ammonia. This is important because it was a key ingredient in artificial fertilizer. His actions enabled the world to feed itself and unlocked the chemistry behind allowing us to grow food that outstrips the consumption of humanity. In the 1990s, he figured out the chemistry behind allowing us to make sure no one died of famine ever again. Providing we put in the input, it was now possible to feed the world thanks to him, and he laid the groundwork for further developments at a time when much of the world was still illiterate and ruled by kings. He has saved countless lives from hunger, untold millions, unlocking a piece of science that changed the face of organic chemistry forever. Then came the First World War. If he were a sorcerer, it would be as if he turned to the darkest of arts. After saving the world and gifting such innovation to humanity, he then turned his mind to destroy it. He invented chemical warfare, designed chemical weapons from scratch, unleashed chlorine gas, and founded an entire dark science that bore the weight to sarin, phosphorus, chlorine, and other unholy weapons of war used by war criminals and tyrants for the next century. He led brigades devoted to chemical war, recruited other renowned scientists to his cause, and turned the science most devoted to the creation and change for the betterment of humanity into another weapon. I'm a chemist. This science is the most used and visible and strikes a balance between raw universal forces and physical applications. It is nothing short of the engineering of reality, shaping the universe like clay in our hands, and he used it to kill on an industrial scale, and thanks to him there will be no going back. In my mind, he is the greatest fall from grace, from one of humanity's greatest to one of its most forsaken. Jared Fogle. OJ has to be up there. By the time I was a child, Bill Cosby was so universally recognized as an icon of wholesome comedy that one of the most popular kids shows of my youth was literally just a cartoon about his childhood. Now the legacy of that little cartoon show is tainted by the very subject of the show itself. That's a fall from grace. From being trusted to be a part of your kid's formative years to becoming one of the vilest and most disliked men of all time. I don't know how I didn't realize that Little Bill was by Cosby until right now. Guess I just never paid enough attention. That's quite a stain on my childhood now. He was never the biggest star, but Mark Solling's fall from grace was massive. Went from being the star of a primetime show to being charged with child XXX and dead in a matter of months. On that note, Allison Mack went from the actress of the breakout character on a long-running popular superhero show to a cult leader who trafficked women, blackmailed them, branded them, and tortured them. There's also Grace Park, one of the stars of Battlestar Galactica and Hawaii Five-0, who was part of that cult too. I think she left though. One of her co-stars was and is still a big part of it though, and actually married Mac. Nikki Klein was Callie on BSG. Robespierre. His actual death was brutal. For those who don't know, he tried to kill himself but was stopped and ended up only blowing his own jaw off. He then was kept alive all night with a massive facial injury until he was beheaded in the morning. Just before he was beheaded, the executioner ripped the bandages off his face, and only the guillotine blade silenced his screams, one of the major events that stand out during the French Revolution for me. Aaron Burr. He was Vice President of the United States when he shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. The duel killed Burr's political career. He was dropped from Thomas Jefferson's ticket in the 1804 election, and he couldn't even win an election for governor of New York. In 1805, Burr plotted to invade Spanish territories and create his own empire, with a side plot to incite a revolution against the United States. In 1807, Burr was put on trial for treason, and he narrowly escaped a conviction. I'm sure there are worse people, but Harvey Weinstein went from being one of the most powerful people in the world to being completely reviled and losing everything. This is the guy who had Meryl Streep and Oprah on speed dial and married a woman 1,000 times too attractive for him. He now uses a walker and has lost his fortune and his reputation. And his genitalia is literally rotting off. In case you didn't know, several of the women who accused him of sexual misconduct all pointed out that he really wasn't interested in sex per se. He just wanted massages. According to some, his hygiene was so poor, he developed an infection in his peen, which then rotted the flesh after being left untreated. He basically got gangrene on his genitals and was effectively impotent. Lance Armstrong. Not just the drug thing either. He went to insane lengths to silence people trying to expose the drug scandal within the cycling sphere. He threatened people and publicly harassed and embarrassed people. Even former Tour de France winners weren't safe from his wrath. He was invincible and used it to bludgeon people's careers, reputations, and personal lives. Not the biggest, but Armie Hammer, casually outing himself as a cannibal, was pretty big. There's a docuseries about it called House of Hammer. Benedict Arnold would be celebrated as the second most important founding father after George Washington, if not for, well, you know. America loses the Battle of Saratoga without him. Saratoga was what convinced the French that we were serious about overthrowing the British. French assistance likely doesn't happen unless we win at Saratoga. Independence was possible without the French, but we'll never know the outcome without them. Kevin Spacey was once my favorite actor, but now I can't look at him the same in any of his works. Rudy Giuliani. The Four Seasons thing still makes me laugh. Hard to believe what he's like now after 9/11. Did he ever have a soul? I honestly think the Four Seasons thing is the funniest thing that has ever happened. It's literally the quintessential example of cringe humor. You can't write something funnier than that. Jeffrey Epstein went from rubbing elbows with world royals and the wealthiest elites of the world to hanging himself in prison all alone. I guess you could say his elitist friends left him hanging. Lance Armstrong's reputation craps the bed pretty enthusiastically. The bracelets didn't help. Hitler was actually praised by world leaders at the time of his rise. I forget what controversy brought him down though. He broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop neutrality pact with the Soviet Union. Crassus, one of the richest men alive in Roman history and one of the three triumvirates with Caesar and Pompey. Then he died by liquid gold being poured down his throat. He did not fall from grace, he was merely soundly beaten by the Parthian Empire. Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, on the other hand, both fell from grace once or twice respectively. Mark Antony fell from the grace of Caesar when he returned from his ruinous Egypt campaign, only to find Antony doing God knows what with Rome, and once again he fell out of grace of the Senate when the donations of Alexandria became widely known. Lepidus was merely pushed out of power by Antony and Octavian. Henry VIII has to be up there. He was a famously handsome, pious, and noble young king, very in love with Catherine when they were married, and over time he became the wife-killing tyrant we know today. Not the farthest, but Phil Spector is worth a dishonorary mention. Vladimir Putin, once thought as a shady but politically savvy and strong leader of a decently powerful nation with one of the strongest militaries in the world, but is now known as an incompetent, greedy asshole leading a country that has gone into a massive economic recession that also has a joke of a military that anything above a literal third world despotic regime could beat with ease. Same. I thought his past experience in KGB and how well he consolidated his political power, plus the fact that he took Crimea with ease, would mean he had a rather unbeatable plan for Ukraine. Turns out that sending 30-year-old tech without a supply line or even ground troops was somehow supposed to capture an entire country. Even with the now revealed to be poorly maintained machines, they could have planned this so much better. NATO was skeptical Ukraine would make it out alive and was preparing to create a border with Russia from outside until they too realized that Putin really didn't know what he was doing. Napoleon went from being emperor and having control over half of Europe to being exiled to a tiny island. Of course he came back, but it was short-lived and he got exiled again to an even more remote island. Napoleon's legacy as a brilliant military tactician survived into recorded history, and his Napoleonic Code became the basis of law in much of Europe. I'd say that even if he fell from grace in his lifetime, his historical legacy was legendary, much like Julius Caesar. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle was an insanely popular silent movie star and had a contract in 1918 for $3 million for 3 years of films, equal to $54 million in 2021 dollars. According to Wikipedia, an unheard of amount. In 1921, he had a party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco over the course of several days. Virginia Rapp ended up dying, possibly from a ruptured bladder. She, or friends, there seem to be different versions, which is a problem with the story, accused Arbuckle of raping her. The newspapers went nuts, making up stories and spreading what little they had. Arbuckle had multiple trials but was ultimately acquitted. He was dropped by the studios. Hollywood reacted by hiring Will Hayes and forming a censor board. Many of Arbuckle's films are lost because distributors and theaters would not play them. This is probably the only person I have seen on this post that was probably an innocent man. He was accused of raping Virginia by a woman who, by many accounts, was a prolific blackmailer and what appears to be the predecessor of Rupert Murdoch in the media who sensationalized it. After the third trial, which took minutes to acquit, the jury apologized to Arbuckle, saying an injustice had been done. Fred Phelps started his career as a celebrated civil rights lawyer in Kansas, followed up by Brown versus Board of Education 20 years later, and ended up forcing them to implement more fair educational conditions for students of color. Went on to form the Westboro Baptist Church, which became one of the most despicable hate groups in the US, notorious for their homophobia and protesting at military funerals. That church was one of the most reviled hate groups in the 90s and the 2000s. Milli Vanilli. Michael Vick is one of the big athletes I usually think of that's not the obvious ones like OJ. One of my favorite subtly horrifying jokes in BoJack Horseman was Mr. Peanut Butter talking about Vick approaching him to work on something. This may be off topic, but the African National Congress went from being the first democratically elected party in South Africa, the beacon of freedom that ended apartheid, to now being the fattest, leech-filled government on the continent. State capture, the biggest presidential cabinet in the world, all making hundreds and thousands of rands a month trying to figure out new ways to finesse citizens. Through tax levies, corruption, nepotism, tenders, and selling off the country through loans that they'll never be able to pay back. It's sad being young in this country because I'm watching my friends and I kill ourselves with how much we drink and do drugs because there isn't anything better to do. Shocking unemployment rates, especially amongst the youth who fall into traps like booze and drugs because they are stuck at home. As educated as some are. Others drop out in high school through pregnancy, circumstance, or dumb crap. But if the ANC delivered on half the crap they promised since '94, then I truly believe we'd be in a better place. Nowhere near the first world, but emerging economy status. This will be the worst fall from grace because the damage done cannot be fixed. Will it get better? Maybe 2 generations from now, but the world is messed up already, and I'll be dead then. So yeah, I don't think it gets a lot worse than that. Joe Pa was just such a failure from top to bottom too. Paterno literally did what he was required to, but had so much influence he should have done more. The chief didn't investigate Sandusky before because they were neighbors and went to church together. The FBI shut down an investigation in the 90s on him. Just years of complete utter failure. Andrew Cuomo has got to be up there. He was a huge media darling during COVID, wrote a book about how well he did, and was being floated as a presidential candidate. Then the sexual harassment and handling of nursing homes made him fall almost overnight. John Wilkes Booth. This needs to be higher. He was a well-respected member of a family of actors. Then he killed Lincoln and basically sent the civil rights movement back 100 years single-handedly out of a delusion that he could somehow save the Confederacy when they had already surrendered. I don't think it's possible to have a worse fall from grace than that. Aung San Suu Kyi won a Nobel Peace Prize, freeing her country from the grip of military rule. Then years later used that military power to oppress the Rohingya Muslims. And now she's in prison because the military didn't think she was sucking up to them enough. Christopher Columbus, revered by Americans for literally centuries for discovering America. Turns out he was actually a genocidal monster, and the recent revelation of his legacy has taken him from intrepid explorer to whom we gratefully owe our existence as a nation, to that guy didn't discover crap and he killed millions of people. To hell with that guy. John Edwards. Ran for VP, getting ready to run for Prez. Then everyone finds out he had an affair and a kid while his wife was dying of cancer. Ian Watkins from the band Lost Prophets. There are a lot of singers and musicians who fell from grace, but I don't think any of the other ones could be worse than this. Bernie Madoff. Not to be the religious guy in the room, but Judas comes to mind. Dude was so trusted by the apostles that they made him their treasurer, and he betrayed them and Jesus, ultimately killing himself in guilt and forever being remembered for and associated with betrayal. Hansi Cronje, post-apartheid cricket captain in South Africa. He united a divided nation through so many sports victories. In 2000, however, he was found guilty of match fixing. He died mysteriously in a plane crash in 2002, soon after being exposed. R. Kelly, obviously. Jeffrey Jones, aka the dad from Beetlejuice, aka the principal from Ferris Bueller. Also, the king in Amadeus. Man, I did not know, in 2002 Jones was arrested for possession of child pornography and accused by a 17-year-old boy of solicitation to pose for nude photographs. He pleaded no contest to a charge of soliciting a minor, as the accuser was 14 when the offense first occurred. Jared from Subway. Jim Baker. LOL. I grew up where he was sent to prison. My mom saw Tammy in Kmart buying a boatload of makeup. Benioff and Weiss. Jebediah Springfield, this beloved patriot and big into the smallest spirit. It was later learned he was nothing but a marauder. He was said to have a silver tongue. The trouble is, he wasn't a great orator, just a guy with a silver prosthetic, which he earned by having his tongue bitten out in a bar fight. Most will still defend his cromulent history. Michael Jackson is definitely up there. Tremendous rising child star, an illustrious career, spinning into countless accusations of differing magnitudes into his untimely end. Moses goes from being a prince of Egypt, ultra-privileged, to being broke and wandering the desert for 40 years. Sam Bankman-Fried's fall has been both impressive and sudden. The story isn't nearly over, but that was one hell of a Ponzi scheme he created. I listened to news updates on Google Home, and I think it's Reuters that's sponsored by EY, and they always have some expert from their firm dole out a tiny amount of advice as a baited hook. Until last week, they were saying how employees wanted their organizations to engage in crypto, a weird claim in itself, and how they were experts and ready to help. Suddenly, they ain't running that intro any longer. Kanye West. In my lifetime, I'll kind of go in order. First off, OJ. This would be legit like if Tom Brady was accused of double homicide. He had been out of the league for some time, but he was still a major name in the sports world and media. He was the spokesman for Hertz for like 25 years. He was in movies and Monday Night Football. This was a crazy major deal. Then he lost it all. He seems to still be doing okay for the most part. He still owes Goldman $25 million or something. He hasn't paid a dime. Jared Fogle. I legit still remember the commercials. He was a big deal. A lot of people bought into his diet. Lance Armstrong. This one was crazy. I remember everyone rooted for him. Everyone and their mother had Livestrong bracelets. He was truly a major inspiration to overcome adversity, then bam, gone overnight. I think a lot of people look at Bill Clinton very differently now. Bill Cosby. Enough said. Britney Spears. 2007 was wild. Now that she's free, boy does she still look like she's doing pretty rough. I feel bad for her. Will Smith destroyed his entire image in the span of 45 seconds. Shows how fake he is. Rudy Giuliani. He was crazy popular after 9/11. Hot take, Trump had solid PR up until he started doing his birther movement around 2011. A lot of people might forget The Apprentice was a crazy popular show. He did Domino's commercials, he would fill in for Regis and Kelly all the time when Regis was out. Yes, young people, there was a time when he was legit actually liked. Michael Jackson's image has really taken a hit in the last 5 to 6 years. Kevin Spacey was arguably at the tip-top peak of his career when the Me Too movement toppled him. He was doing anything and everything around then. Now he's gone. Not the biggest, but I think Ellen's fall from grace was well-deserved, seeing as she is a massive piece of crap. I don't know about had, but Elon Musk is doing a pretty stellar job trying to speedrun this one. Ryan, aka Temp, that guy couldn't handle corporate life. Richard Nixon. The Marquis de Lafayette. He was a military officer during the American Revolutionary War and a close confidant of George Washington. He was then one of the leading members of the Estates General and helped draft the Declaration of Man and the Citizen with help from Thomas Jefferson, after which he became Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard. Then came the Champ-de-Mars massacre, which cost him a lot of clout and popularity. Not long after, he was forced to flee and go into exile, where he was captured and spent years in prison. During the rule of Bonaparte, he kept himself largely in the background. Then, as his last act of note, he gave his support to Louis Philippe, who even during Lafayette's lifetime turned away from the promises he made to Lafayette. At one stage during the two major revolutions of the 18th century, Lafayette was in the inner circle of power, but by the end of his life he was despised by many of his countrymen and forgotten by many Americans. Saddam Hussein. Marie Antoinette went from being Queen of France to getting her head cut off by her own people. I would say that wins. She was Austrian and never really accepted by the French. Elon Musk. I feel like he went from the people's hero to now everybody thinks he's an ignorant asshole. J.K. Rowling went from beloved, inspiring, and ludicrously successful to so reviled that even people she made famous can't stand her and publicly denounce her. And it was all so unnecessary. All she had to do was retire and have a great time while sitting on a huge mountain of money. Happy life, great legacy, and inspiration to a whole generation were in her grasp, and she dropped it all in the garbage. Nebraska football. Definitely not the biggest one, but Milli Vanilli should be in the conversation. Is Kanye too recent for history? In modern history, W went from a 99% approval rating from his own party to the point that no one on the right will admit to voting for him. Way late to the party, but I'd say Zuckerberg, from connecting the world to enabling genocides and messing up elections. General Robert E. Lee. He was the United States' best general before the US Civil War. but he betrayed our country and sided with Virginia and the Southern slaveholders. He helped perpetuate one of the vilest wars ever fought. Then his ego and hubris got in his way, and just when the South might have been able to force secession to be recognized, he smashed his army at Gettysburg, and the South was running from there on out. Arlington National Cemetery was placed on Lee's home at Arlington just to shame him for his treason. All those dead men are buried on the plantation of a general who swore to have loved his soldiers, who were trained at West Point to serve the United States. I love the stupid narrative the South has about the War of Northern Aggression, after they seceded and they fired the first shots, all so they could continue to own 4 million people as slaves. And if it wasn't about slavery and white supremacy, why did they write it into their Constitution? Jefferson Davis deserved to have been hanged, preferably from a sour apple tree. Southerners were lucky. In plenty of countries and times, every last one would have been wiped out. Lee surrendered and faded away, but then racists started celebrating like he was some mastermind. He lost. You don't build statues of losers. Steven Seagal never was that great. His movie career only took off due to his mafia connection, and he was always an asshole. His own mother once called him out on his bullcrap because he kept lying about his past even before he was famous. Christopher Columbus is a big one of late, from the brave discoverer of the Americas to a very hated figure for his extremely cruel actions. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the posthumous leader of East Pakistan, leading to the creation of the independent nation Bangladesh through a bloody war in 1971, stayed in West Pakistan prison the whole time while his followers and the people fought through the war. He came back to independent Bangladesh in January of 1972 and became the first prime minister with the unanimous support of the whole nation, created a paramilitary force to be run by his sons and the ones close to him, abducted, tortured, and killed as many of the political opponents, especially the ones who helped him rise to the top, as he could, closed all newspapers except the ones run by the government, and banned all other political parties except the ones he owned, declared himself the prime minister for life. Billions of dollars of foreign aid destined to help the people of the war-torn country just disappeared, caused the first famine in independent Bangladesh in 1974 through massive corruption, looting, smuggling, and mismanagement of his family members and the leaders of his circle. The nation had basically become their family enterprise. Some military officials organized a coup in August of 1975, killing him and every single family member they could find. 2 daughters living in the UK survived. One of them is the current prime minister. On that very day, millions of people came out in the streets rejoicing the good riddance. Charlie Sheen. Not a lot of female names on here, so I'm gonna say Tonya Harding, US champion figure skater, but then tried to 86 Nancy Kerrigan's knees, and is now a joke. Ticketmaster's currently working on it. For my fellow Canadian CBC head, Gian Gomeshi. Since I just watched the documentary, I would say Jimmy Savile had a hard fall. Liz Truss, the UK Prime Minister who was only 45 days in office. During this period, she has cost the UK taxpayers an estimated £30 billion. That is PS 666 million per day in the office. The actual damage may even be higher when you include the damage she has done to individual households. Think about it, PS 666 million per day. One wonders why she isn't in prison. Mel Gibson. It won't be of historical proportions, but Brett Favre has recently gone from everybody's favorite football player to radioactive. Amber Heard. Ellen DeGeneres. Thanks for watching until the end. Did you want to mention someone that wasn't mentioned in the video? Please do so in the comments below. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and hit the notification bell so that you know when our next video is available. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.